This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Basically, I just started learning how to perfect that. I just used to have my friends late at night, 3, 4 in the morning, go to the gym. I said, shoot the ball. And just shoot over here, shoot over here, shoot over there, shoot over there. I just hit that react. I just practiced a lot about the angle of the ball and trajectory of it. You got a Larry Bird, it's going to spin. You got a Magic, it may spin. When Michael shoot over here, I position myself right there. Now I hit the rim, it's boom, So basically, I just started learning how to put myself in a position to get the ball.
Well, we had this third and fourth episodes of The Last Dance air on Sunday. This is the morning after the two episodes aired, and we're going to go back and recap. First, starting with episode 3, a great episode introducing our man Dennis Rodman into the show, really for the first time. A look back at the bad boys, the Detroit Pistons, that team that really, we don't talk about a ton, but they were like, you think 80s basketball, that's the team you think about a lot with the way the style of play they played. And then we had the Bulls kind of turning the corner in year 3 under Jordan and the win over the Cavs, the shot over Elo. So a lot going on in this documentary. This is Distant Replay. We appreciate you joining us. We're going to usually go back and watch old games and we talk about those quite a bit. But instead, over the next couple weeks, we're doing this Last Dance documentary, making sure we spend some time just giving our thoughts, because like everybody else right now, we're watching the series, and we have a lot of thoughts on what we're watching, what we're seeing, what we're learning along the way. So let's jump right into this episode, Mike. Dennis Rodman. I mean, we had kind of looked forward to this one quite a bit, because, I mean, of all the players on that team, Dennis kind of has his own unique story, and we started learning that.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was definitely looking forward to this episode. To be honest, I was expecting a little more in terms of Dennis Rodman escapade stories than we got in this. We did get some good ones, though, that I'm sure we'll hit on here shortly. But overall, just, not that I forgot how Rodman was, but when you hear it in the context of him trying to fit in with a team, whether it was when he left the Pistons and joined the Spurs, and how much of a malcontent and a drain he was on the Spurs, and then when he goes to the Bulls, how it's sort of just the surrounding cast that you have and your coach, how big of a difference it can make with a guy like Rodman. I mean, the bookends of his career with the Pistons and the Bulls, he had coaches and teammates that got through to him, and he was a big asset. With the Spurs, where he actually put up the best stats of his career, he was such a troublemaker, and no one could get through to him there, that it really that was fascinating to me when they went through that in this episode.
Yeah, so they used this episode to really kind of set up who Dennis was, kind of his background, and he had a hard life coming up and got an opportunity in college, and then really kind of came into his own and really kind of showed who he was before we got into more of the escapades and the craziness off the court, which we kind of got telling this episode into our next one. So we'll get to that a little bit. But, you look at what Dennis was able to do, and we'll start with him because he was a big part of this episode. And they also tied it in too, because it all kind of makes sense with where they were in terms of the 98 season, because they keep working back these multiple timelines. That 98 season is right when they kind of got off that awful start. They were 8-7, a lot of questions on what was happening. Pippen still wasn't back yet. So it all kind of ties in to where Rodman has a big part of that turnaround in that season. But for Rodman first, I mean, the guy I think most remarkable to me was the fact that he realized early on in his NBA career that he had to become a defensive guy and a rebounding guy. And hearing him talk about it, I've never heard anybody talk about defense and rebounding the way he does.
Yeah, I mean, hearing him talk about rebounding is like hearing a savant talk about whatever they're known for. Like when you have a guy who's just like a really smart guy and he's known for one thing and he just can talk about that one thing all day in a way that blows your mind. That was like Rodman talking about rebounding in this episode and talking about how he used to study his own teammates and opposing players and study how their ball would spin. And thus, based on that, he would know how it was most likely to hit off the rim. And now that he looked at things that way, when you see highlights of him, he was unique in the fact that he would move to go get a rebound before the ball hit the rim.
Yeah.
And it's just such a unique way to look at it. And that's not even getting into his on-ball defense, which in this episode, David Aldridge, who, I mean, if you followed the NBA back in the day, or even if you still do, he's one of the prominent, NBA writers and analysts. He said he's never seen a better on-ball defender than Dennis Rodman in his 30 years covering the game.
Yeah, you watch what he did, even against Magic Johnson in the playoffs, and they showed him defending him on the ball was remarkable. I thought it was pretty crazy that he would talk about being in the gym till 3, 4 in the morning and just letting guys put up shots while he chased down rebounds. I mean, can you imagine being that dedicated to any craft? Because there's nothing fun about rebounding, right? For most people, for like 98% of basketball players, they want to get in, get their shots. We'll shoot for 2, 3, 4 hours. We'll shoot till 3 in the morning. But somebody that's like, hey, just come out and shoot and let me chase down your rebound till 3 in the morning is nuts.
Hey, sure, right? You want to chase down my rebounds for 2 or 3 hours? When do you want to go? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's every kid's or basketball player's dream right there, having an automatic rebounder to go out there with you. But just goes to show, it's like anyone who's really committed to their craft, right? You hone into a niche and you get really, really good at it. And his was rebounding and defense. And you went into how he guarded Magic Johnson during those final series when they played the Lakers. And he evolved as he got older, right? As he got older and later into his career, he would then cover, the likes of Karl Malone in these 2 final series against the Jazz in the last 2 years here with the Bulls. So the guys, he was multifaceted in that way as well, where he could cover multiple positions along with the rebounding.
So we had the introduction, too, of Doug Collins, who had that nice little, that tight curl that he was wearing back in the day, looked completely different. But I didn't realize, and I remember Doug, and I remember, he did a good job kind of turning that Bulls team around, and kind of he was the start. He came around as they were starting to take off and become that winning Bulls team, not just a team that relied on Jordan, but a winning team. And it was pretty cool to see how well he got along with MJ, and it just goes to show you how important it was that as bad as much as we like to hate on Jerry Krause, and he didn't take too many shots in this episode. He took a couple, but didn't take too many. But the fact that he was able to put coaches in place that worked well with the guys on these teams was so important, because it eventually did fall apart, as we find out, and as what this whole documentary is about. But the fact that they were able to put things together and keep all these pieces in place and everybody happy for so long was really remarkable.
Yeah, especially when you consider changing coaches right when your best player is ascending into one of the most popular people on planet Earth, not just in the NBA, but on planet Earth. They went into it here. Those 4 years with Doug Collins rattled off all the accolades that Jordan got, right? He was league MVP, All-Star MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. He has a coach that he really likes. To make changes in the organization from a coaching staff standpoint, or even on the roster in the middle of that, because you think you can get even better, I thought looked good for Jerry Krause, because I never knew the relationship was that good between Collins and Jordan.
Right.
And I have a feeling, I think we'll get to Phil Jackson in the next episode, but there has to be more to that story. I doubt Jordan was, as good with that as it seemed right off the bat.
With Collins, you mean?
No, with Collins being fired.
Yeah. You
know what I mean? We'll get to that in the next episode, but I just looking forward like that and saying we're really good now, but I think if we make 1 or 2 moves, we can be even better. Like you said, I think that looks good on Jerry Krause, and something that, we're going to rip him, and rightfully so, for how he handled things as a whole, but you got to give him credit for this.
Yeah. And I thought Doug, the great coaches, they know, like, you put your ego aside. And I think he knew he had to do that with Jordan. I mean, he knew that was his guy, and he knew that he would win and lose on this guy. And he found out, which was remarkable in that first game at the Garden, the mecca of basketball, where Jordan just says, "Coach, I'm not going to let you lose your debut." And then goes off and was that the game he set the record for most points by an opposing player?
Yeah, he had 50.
I mean, ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous. Again, and I just said it, not to repeat myself, but we're getting into like the real ascension of Jordan here, into like no doubt best player in the world, Michael Jordan.
And the other part of this story, and I thought this episode was great because it all kind of worked together really, really well, was, as you mentioned, the ascension of Jordan. comes right at the time. Again, we see the Celtics starting to fade, as we saw Jordan in the previous episode go off of the Garden, even though his team got swept in the playoffs, but kind of showed that, hey, he can go toe-to-toe with anybody. Now we have the introduction of the Pistons, who it was great because I thought we would have gotten a little bit more on the bad boys and kind of who they were and what they were for basketball, but I guess that's what a separate documentary like the 30 for 30 on that team is for. This is about the Bulls and that aspect of the Pistons team. But that bad boys team coming around right as Jordan was rising to stardom and kind of taking over the league. But this was that last obstacle really for the Bulls, and we really got to see that here. And I don't really remember it as much. I'm not going to speak for everyone. I remember those kind of matchups, but I didn't realize how much of an impact the bad boys had on Jordan, the Bulls, and really them becoming that dynasty.
Yeah, so in this episode ends right after the 1989 conference finals where the Pistons beat the Bulls 4-2. And they go into, the Jordan rules. I mean, there's been books written about this. There's been countless, segments of TV shows and documentaries over the years going over what the Pistons game plan was to handle Michael Jordan. And, it was funny when they were going through all the different rules, hey, if he's on the wing, push him towards the middle. If he's on the top of the key, make him go left. If he's in the post, double him when he's in the post. And they asked, I think it was John Sally, if that didn't work, what'd you do then? It's like, well, if he got near the basket, we just knocked him to the ground.
Yeah, if he went baseline, we let him.
That was it. Like before he jumps in the air, once he jumps in the air, forget about it, knock him to the ground.
Yeah.
And they showed highlight after highlight after highlight of him getting pummeled.
And it makes a lot of sense now because I thought it was remarkable. We know how competitive Jordan is. I mean, I think people that don't know Jordan are kind of getting introduced to who he was back in his prime will now realize how competitive it is. The hatred that still lasts today for the Pistons, I mean, we're talking, we're 30 years later. 30 years later, and he says he hates the Pistons as much now as he did then. And you kind of get that feeling why. I mean, you watch him just get beat up and knocked down, and, it was just kind of that style of play. Like, you're not, and this is what the bad boys did. I mean, this is not just the Jordan thing necessarily, but they were just like, look, we're going to out-physical you. Our style of basketball may not be great, but somebody like Jordan who plays the game at such a high level and wants to go toe-to-toe with somebody that's scoring, that's playing defense, that's getting after it. He didn't have a lot of respect for those teams, it didn't feel like, especially your boy Isaiah.
Yeah, and Jordan even said it. He said, it was different with the Pistons. They made it personal, and look, back then, those Pistons teams were not very likable. I mean, you could call it what it is. And it was mostly because of their style of play and how they handled themselves. You got to remember, they go through this good in the documentary, how, you went from the Bird and Magic Celtics and Lakers sort of trading championships throughout the 80s. Now you get into the later 80s and, the league wants it to be Michael Jordan take the throne from them and lead us into the 90s.
Yeah.
Well, in the interim here, in these 2-3 year period, you have the Pistons sort of putting a damper on that. And I think the Pistons players took it as, well, no one wants us to win because we're not Jordan, and that's why people don't like us. Where I took it as, I just think it's because, like, you sort of tackle people when they're heading to the hoop for layups. Like, I think that's why people don't like you. I think their style of play sort of took away from the different good players they did have, like Isaiah Thomas. Like, I think he's remembered completely differently than he would be if he was on a team that played a little bit differently, because he was a wonderful player. But a lot of times the first thing you think of with Isaiah is not his great play on the court.
No, not at all. And you mentioned we kind of finish off with that playoff loss, and it was pretty remarkable to see how close the Bulls were, especially the Pistons go and sweep the Lakers in the finals. But to get to that point, let's go back to that series with the Cavs, and this was pretty remarkable because we all see the shot. I mean, the camera work on that shot was remarkable and amazing, and you got to see him float through the air, basically double pump, hit that shot over Elo. But to kind of back up a second before that shot, so I didn't realize against the Cavs that year, the Bulls didn't win a single game. They were 0-6 against the Cavs in the regular season. Heading into that series.
And all of the beat writers for the Chicago papers picked the Cavs to win.
Yeah.
So that says something. You have these beat writers follow these teams around all year, obviously. And one of the beat writers thought the Cavs would win in 3. The other thought the Cavs would win in 4. and the other thought the Cavs would win in 5. And that moment where Jordan's telling them, hey, we took care of you, and now tonight we're going to take care of you, kind of going in order with games 3, 4, and 5. That's awesome. And that just goes to show Jordan used all that stuff as motivation.
I wonder, quick side note, Jordan was clearly, and he was very transparent about the fact that he read the news and the fact that he read what these guys were writing. It was a different day and age. I mean, really, if you're a fan of the Bulls, you probably had 2 or 3 sources of places that you would read every day, right? You'd maybe grab the 2 papers and you read 2 or 3 columnists or reporters every day. So you didn't have a ton of information. It's a little bit easier to manage what you're reading and getting through everything. Now, I mean, you have guys that, especially coaches, and they have to, I don't read any of the news. I don't see what they're writing. I don't pay any attention to that kind of stuff. I wonder how Jordan would have done in this day and age with social media, because people would have found something to complain about Jordan about. He would have scored 69 points, and they would have said, well, he took too many shots, or, his team only won by whatever. Everybody finds a criticism now, no matter how great somebody is. I wonder how he would have been in this day and age if he would have just eventually just ignored it because it's coming from guys with, the egg Twitter account profile pictures and people that don't attach their name to things. I wonder if he would have been really reluctant to pay attention to that and just really pay attention to the main sources, the people that, attach their name to their opinions and put their face out there on their opinions. What do you think he would have done in social media?
I think we had to worry about Jordan with the social media is maybe not what he was doing on the court, is maybe what he was doing off the court.
Yeah, and that's a different conversation.
I think his behavior, sure. I think his behavior there would have changed a lot had he been under a consistent microscope, because he was already under a pretty significant microscope for the day and age with his off the court stuff.
Yeah,
whether it be the gambling or the partying, stuff like that. But as far as the on the court stuff goes, I think he would have largely used it as motivation, but it not have been outwardly critical of people based on what they said on Twitter.
Right.
I think he would adjust it to that just like he adjusted to everything.
Yeah.
Even like just as a comparison, the way he dealt with these Pistons teams, I mean, exceedingly frustrating for him to have to deal with playing them and the sort of treatment he got from them in terms of how physical they were. But when you're watching those highlights, he never let it get to him and his emotions, boil over.
Yeah.
He never had a moment where he totally lost it. And I give him credit for that, because those highlights of those Pistons teams, man, those are something to watch now when you're 30 years removed from it.
Yeah, they are. So that Cavs shot, and I love that. What an ending to that game, by the way. Maybe we should go back and watch that game at some point for this podcast. But, Jordan gets a shot, gives him the lead. Cavs come back down. Elo gets to the basket, scores to take a 1-point lead with 3 seconds left. Again, this is in Cleveland. Cleveland's been the better team all year. Everybody's picked the Cleveland to win. And they go to the timeout, drawing up a play, right? They say, got to get the ball to Jordan. Jordan knows he has time for one dribble. He's got to get a shot off. And meanwhile, in the other huddle, the Cavs, you got Ron Harper, which was great in this episode. He had a brief appearance, but, he basically was just like, Coach called Elo to defend Jordan. And Jordan even said, Harper was defending me better all game, better than Elo. And it blew Harper's mind. He was just like, kind of F that, whatever, Coach, if that's what you want to go with. And, of course, we saw it happen. Jordan hits a shot. But Elo didn't play bad defense. I know Elo gets the blame because he had the reaction. His name's on the call. We just kind of remember him specifically. But the dude was right on Jordan. Jordan has to float through the air, double clutch, going away from his shooting hand, and have to hit that jumper at the buzzer. Nobody else is hitting that shot.
Yeah, that, like you said, what else is Elo supposed to do? And there's maybe a couple guys in the history of basketball that could hit that shot. It was a great shot. One that is one of the 2 or 3 career highlights whenever they show a Michael Jordan montage that you see from that camera angle from the opposite baseline there. And just a great shot by a great player, and is sort of when the legend of Jordan winning playoff games with clutch shots sort of begins. Yeah,
and did you love what he said after that about? And I guess you saw with his reaction on the court, all the fist pumping, and he finally had won that first real big series, and he was just like, "F the haters. If you guys aren't with us, F you. We don't care."
Yeah, that was great. That was such a not knowing what he said in that moment. It's great that he had the presence of mind to let everyone know what he thought there on press row right in the moment.
That's kind of where we are right now. Is Jordan we have that 3 parts. You got Rodman introduced for the first time, kind of his timeline, playing with the bad boys, kind of seeing how he ends up with the Bulls, and that kind of path that he takes to get there, not really understanding what he's going to do when he gets there because of his past. Will he fit in? Will he not? The Bulls starting to rise, but the Pistons right in their way. And then also in our current timeline, 1997-98 season, the Bulls are off to that slow start. We kind of start to finish that calendar year off, and we're heading into that next season, or that next year, 98, the actual 98. And, at this point, we're kind of starting to put this whole season together. But overall, I thought this episode was really good in terms of introducing Rodman. And I'm glad we're going to get to more Rodman in episode 4. I thought for the time, I was like, man, surely this is not where we're going to stop off with Rodman. There's got to be a lot more to this Rodman story, because this is more like who Rodman's background was, who is a guy, a person before he evolves into this kind of sideshow that he becomes.
Yeah, and some other Rodman sort of quick hits here. I didn't realize he was 25 years old when he came into the NBA.
Yeah.
I looked that up. His rookie year, he was 25 years old. I thought the influence Madonna. I know he had dated Madonna, because you heard about that back in the day when it was going on, because Madonna was like a superstar.
Right, she's in her prime.
And yeah, she was in her prime. And I never knew the influence that Madonna had on him.
Yeah.
Basically like, hey, Dennis, be who you are. Don't let other people, dictate who you are. And that's sort of when you saw Rodman change drastically from when he went to the Pistons to the Spurs, when he started coloring his hair and wearing the earrings and doing all this stuff that was, for the day and time was completely outlandish. And then I thought what a good moment was Pippen and Jordan and Jackson realizing, putting the past behind them, because we went through the hatred that the Pistons had, and the Pistons and Bulls had, putting all that behind them and realizing Dennis Rodman could be a piece that would make them win, and letting bygones be bygones and welcoming him in. And Pippen and Rodman, rather, he had the respect of those guys, and they respected him right from day one.
Yep. Yeah, indeed, they did, and that was a big part of their success too. These small moves, as you mentioned, these small moves, in retrospect, turned out to be just humongous, really risks that were taken, but really set this team from being really good to unbeatable, essentially, is what they became. So that was important. One other thought I had too is it was pretty cool seeing, obviously the access that Ahmad Rashad had throughout this. You see him in the locker room. I think even one time he's walking in the locker room after one of the games when they shut the door on the cameras, and he's heading in with the team. That's the kind of access he had. And then you had Craig Sager was great too. You see why these guys love a guy like Craig Sager and why they've been such a part of the NBA for so long. When you see Sager give Rodman a cash handshake to take care of his fine that he was going to get on the court. Sager's was an awesome dude.
Oh, for sure. And you had all those guys like Craig Sager, like you mentioned, Ahmad Rashad, the writers like Michael Wilbon or David Aldridge. You got to remember, these guys were national TV guys, national columnists that covered the NBA. So you have a span of, from when Jordan came in the league till 98, where they're virtually around Jordan every single year for the second half of the year and the playoff run, right? So they develop relationships. That's not odd. I think it happens in every sport, but more so back then, where I think the media, they got a little bit closer to the players, and the players allowed a relationship to happen. I think these days, because of social media, like we always talk about, the players are a lot more guarded and keep the media at bay. Yeah,
you got a combination of having so many people that are covering a sport that you really, you don't know day to day outside of a handful of people who's where, and who are you from, and all this stuff. And then plus, you mentioned things get taken out of context, headlines, clickbait, all that stuff. It's hard to trust. We say fake news, we hear that term a lot, but beyond that, just the idea that it's entertainment value a lot of times, and you just got to get whatever it takes to get that person to your website. Has probably burned a lot of bridges along the way, whether or not it's intended. Just kind of the state of where we are with media. So that's a good point. I think that's why you had these guys that were so ingrained, but had so much trust with the players, and so much for the fact that we'll get into next episode, something that happens with Rodman that we don't even hear about, because these guys are willing to keep it off the record. Anything else we want to close out on before we wrap up recap of episode 3?
Just, in general, just the shape that this season's taking. Because again, you don't realize it when you're back in the day, when you're following this stuff. But, I just thought the storyline of the Bulls starting off really slow, Dennis Rodman sort of clicking into gear and saying, I need to be the second option here. I need to be the second most important player to Jordan for us to sort of kick things in high gear. They get to 24-11 by January after I think they started like 7-8 or 8-8 or something to that effect.
8-7, yeah.
They end up 24-11 in January. Pippen comes back after missing the first 35 games of the year. He comes back around January 10th, and then boom, Rodman almost instantly turns back into, man, I've been on the straight and narrow a little too long. I need to let loose a little bit.
Yeah, it's been 8 weeks since I've last gone crazy, and I thought that was remarkable too. You know, Rodman was the piece that really sparked that. I mean, once he clicked, he went and saw Jordan in his hotel room. You know, just kind of breaking the ice. You know, you feel that awkward tension. Like, I don't know what I'm going to say to this guy. He's the best player. He's my, the leader of the team. I was asking for a cigar. Let me just kind of break the ice and just try to have that conversation get started in some way. And then Jordan kind of knew, like, okay, he wants to come talk to me. And from that point on, it clicked. And it takes us to January. So that's where we'll pick up on episode 4. We'll have that recap coming up next here on Distant Replay. Let me remind you, you can find all of our episodes at distantreplaypodcast.com. Plus all the games we watch, you'll find the video for those full broadcasts as well there. Find us on Twitter at Distant Podcast and YouTube as well. All of our shows are archived on YouTube as well. So Mike, we'll recap the episode 4 next, and looking forward to that one because I think we're really starting to kind of pick it up.
Absolutely. Episode 4 was a great one, and I'm looking forward to tackling it.